Imagine the scene, August 23rd, 1956. In the heart of New York, at a public incinerator, federal agents of the United States government supervised the unloading of a heavy truck. What was about to be thrown into the flames was not medical waste, nor evidence of a common crime. It was 6 tons of books, scientific journals, and original manuscripts. We were not in the Middle Ages, nor in the Germany of 1933. We were in the greatest democracy of the Western world. And the target was the lifetime work of a man who dared to challenge the pillars of modern physics and medicine. His name was Wilhelm Reich. To the system, Reich was not just an erratic scientist. He had become a danger to public order. But stop for a moment and reflect. Why burn books? If a man's theories are just baseless madness, time, scientific debate, and logic will naturally take care of burying them into oblivion. However, the American government did not want Reich's ideas to have a natural death. They needed to incinerate every physical proof of his existence, every graph, every laboratory record. The question that remains in the air decades later is what was in those pages that caused such terror in federal agencies. The answer is simple and, at the same time, terrifying. Reich believed he had discovered something that the industrial, medical, and military complex could not allow to become public knowledge. The existence of a primordial energy, omnipresent, free, and capable of manipulating life itself and the planet's climate. Before we dive into the isolated laboratory where these forbidden discoveries were made, check if you are already subscribed here to the channel. Turn on the notification bell, because what we are revealing today is only one part of a much larger puzzle that the system tries to hide at all costs. Go ahead and leave your like, as this small gesture helps our voice break through the algorithm's block and prevent stories like Reich's from being silenced again. Wilhelm Reich was the only scientist in United States history whose works were sentenced to the bonfire by a direct court order. He crossed the invisible line that separates permitted science from what the system labels as forbidden science. He claimed to have found the key to the vital energy of the universe, a force he christened Orgone. For Reich, the space surrounding us was not a dead vacuum or a sterile void, but a pulsating ocean of a bluish energy, a substance invisible to the untrained eye, but one that connected the functioning of the human body to the formation of clouds in the sky and the movement of galaxies. It is fundamental that we understand the absurd weight of this act of censorship. When the government burns books, it is not trying to protect public health or academic truth. It is trying to protect a monopoly over our perception of reality. Reich was relentlessly persecuted, labeled as insane by newspaper headlines, imprisoned like a common criminal, and finally died in a cold cell, suffering a sudden cardiac arrest just a few days before his parole. He was, without a doubt, the martyr of biophysics, the man who dared to say that the energy flowing in your veins and moving your thoughts is exactly the same energy that moves storms and regulates the rain cycle. The method used against him became a historical pattern, the systematic destruction of reputation preceding physical elimination. By incinerating his work under federal supervision, the system tried to ensure that no one, at any future time, could replicate his experiments with precision. But they forgot one detail. Although paper burns at 451 degrees Fahrenheit, the frequency of truth remains engraved in the fabric of space-time. What Reich discovered in his laboratory in Maine, named organon, was so disruptive to the oil economy and social control that the government preferred to act like a medieval inquisition rather than allow humanity to have access to this technology of abundance. What you are about to hear next is not just the biography of a fallen scientist. It is the report of a discovery that was stolen from all of us. As you look today at the skies monitored by satellites and at the HARP antenna complexes, remember, a man had already learned how to talk to the clouds and heal the atmosphere 70 years ago, and he paid the highest price for it. To understand how a man ended his days in a federal prison with his books burned, we need to go back to the lights of Vienna in the 1920s. Wilhelm Reich did not emerge from nowhere. He was considered the prodigy disciple of Sigmund Freud, the intellectual successor that the master of psychoanalysis had long awaited. In his early 20s, he was already Freud's first clinical assistant and the director of Vienna's first psychoanalytic clinic. Reich was seen as the legitimate heir to this new science, the genius who would take the study of the mind to the next level. But while Freud was content to speak about traumas and the subconscious as abstract concepts, Reich began to notice something that no one else saw. The mind and the body are not separated by a border. They are the same thing. Reich observed that when a patient suffered from a neurosis, their physical body reacted. Muscles became tense, breathing became shallow, and posture transformed into a kind of armor. He called this muscular armoring. He realized that trauma was not just in the head, but was literally stored in the tissues, organs, and fibers of the patient. It was here that he began to ask the question that would seal his fate. If the mind contents the body, what is this force, this energy that flows through us and that, when blocked, makes us sick? Freud spoke of libido as a symbolic concept of desire. Reich, with his restless and pragmatic mind, said, "No, libido is not a symbol. It is a real, measurable physical energy that can be felt." This statement was the first major rift. Imagine the audacity. In an era where science was trying to distance itself from everything that seemed mystical, Reich was asserting that life was moved by a tangible, biological electric current. He stopped merely listening to his patients and began observing how they breathed, how they moved, and how energy pulsed in their bodies. This quest took him off the couch and into the biology laboratory. Reich began to study microorganisms through high-powered microscopes, devices that he himself modified to see beyond what conventional science allowed. It was in these observations that he witnessed something extraordinary. He saw tiny vesicles of bluish energy forming from decaying organic matter. He called these units bions. For Reich, he was seeing life emerging from non-life, pure energy organizing itself into matter. From that moment on, Reich ceased to be a psychologist to become a biophysicist. He realized that this bluish energy he saw in the bions was not limited to the human body or to cells. It was everywhere. It was in the atmosphere, in the soil, and even in the glow of the stars. He named it orgone, a combination of the words organism and orgastic, referring to the fundamental pulsation of life. But the science of Vienna, and later that of Berlin, was not ready for a man who claimed to have found the ether, the vital force that the ancients called prana or chi, but now explained through test tubes and electrodes. Reich began to be isolated. He was expelled from the International Psychoanalytic Association and began to be persecuted by the Nazis, not only for being Jewish, but for his dangerously free mind. He fled Europe for the United States, believing that in the land of the free, he could finally prove that the universe was not an empty and mechanical place, but a living and vibrant organism. What he did not know was that by trying to prove the existence of this energy, he was about to collide with forces far more powerful than the traumas of the human mind. He was about to discover that if you find the source of life, you become the greatest enemy of those who profit from disease and scarcity. Stay tuned, because now Reich's journey leaves the elegant clinics of Vienna and enters the isolated forests of Maine, where theory transformed into physical devices, technologies that the United States government decided no one should ever see functioning. Reich's next step was not just to heal minds, but to try to heal the planet itself. And that is where the danger truly began. When Wilhelm Reich arrived in the United States in 1939, he wasn't just bringing suitcases. He was bringing a discovery that could rewrite every physics textbook in every university. He settled on a vast estate in Maine, which he named Organon. and there he began to document what he called the greatest discovery of the millennium, orgone. But what exactly is this energy, and why is it so dangerous to the system? For Reich, orgone was not ordinary electricity. He described it as a primordial, massless cosmic energy that exists throughout the entire universe. If you look at the sky on a very clear day, you can sometimes see tiny dots of light dancing or waving. Official science calls these entoptic phenomena, something inside your eye. Reich said no. He claimed that what you are seeing is the pulsation of life energy itself. He said this energy has a specific color, a soft blue. And here is the detail that will blow your mind. Reich realized that this blue energy does not follow the laws of thermodynamics we learned in school. In traditional physics, energy always flows from the strongest to the weakest until it reaches equilibrium. That's why your coffee gets cold if you leave it on the table. But orgone does the opposite. It flows from the weakest to the strongest. It accumulates, it concentrates, and it creates life where there should only be entropy. Reich called this negative entropy. Imagine a battery that charges itself just by being present in the environment. This isn't just a scientific curiosity. It is the end of the energy monopoly as we know it. To prove his theory, Reich built what he called the orgone energy accumulator. The concept was brilliantly simple and, for that very reason, terrifying to industry. He discovered that organic materials, such as wood, cotton, or wool, attract and absorb orgone, while metals attract and reflect it instantly. By creating a box with alternating layers of organic material and metal, he created an energy trap. Inside this box, orgone concentrated at levels much higher than in the external environment. Reich began conducting experiments that defied logic. The temperature inside the accumulator rose without any external heat source. Plants grew faster and with more vigor. And most controversially of all, he began to observe that patients sitting inside these boxes reported inexplicable cures for chronic diseases and a sudden surge in vitality. Try to understand what this meant in 1940. A man was claiming that the vacuum of space was full of infinite free energy and that you could capture it using nothing but layers of metal and cotton. If Reich was right, the need for fossil fuels, complex power grids, and a multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical industry based solely on symptom suppression could simply disappear. Reich wasn't just selling an idea. He was publishing data, charts, and thermal observations. He invited the greatest scientists of the time to see it with their own eyes. One of those invitations was made to Albert Einstein himself. The meeting between the two lasted for hours, and Einstein went as far as to admit in an initial letter that if Reich's thermal phenomenon were real, it would be a bombshell in physics. But as we will see, the bombshell wasn't used to light up the world, but to destroy the man who discovered it. The system does not tolerate abundance. Official science is built upon scarcity. And when Wilhelm Reich began to show that energy was free and literally floating in the bluish air of Maine, the silencing mechanism was activated. And if you think a box made of wood and metal was bold, wait until you see what happened when Reich decided to point this energy at the sky. He stopped merely observing orgone and began using it as a weapon for climate manipulation. It was at that moment that the American government realized they weren't just dealing with an eccentric doctor, but with someone who had control of the heavens in his hands. The story of Wilhelm Reich reaches a cinematic turning point in January 1941. Imagine the meeting. On one side, the most famous physicist in the world, Albert Einstein. On the other, the rebel, Wilhelm Reich. Reich didn't just want fame. He wanted official science to recognize his discovery. He took an orgone accumulator to Einstein's house in Princeton and challenged the genius: measure the temperature inside and outside this box. If there is a constant difference, the laws of thermodynamics are incomplete. Einstein, curious, accepted the challenge. For 10 days, he conducted the experiment in his basement. And here is what most history books omit. Einstein confirmed that the temperature inside Reich's box was in fact higher than the surrounding air. In a handwritten letter, Einstein admitted the phenomenon, calling it an observation of great importance. At that moment, it seemed Reich had won. The existence of an invisible energy that generated heat from nothing was about to be announced to the world by the greatest icon of science. But then, silence fell. Shortly after, one of Einstein's assistants sent a simplistic explanation, claiming that the temperature difference was merely a conventional air current in the basement. Einstein, strangely, stopped responding to Reich's letters and never mentioned the subject publicly again. What happened behind the scenes at Princeton? Reich was convinced that Einstein had been pressured to back down, because validating orgone would mean admitting that the physics of the vacuum on which Einstein had based his relativity was wrong. While official science turned its back on him, Reich decided he no longer needed academic approval. He needed practical results. He began distributing his accumulators to independent doctors and researchers. Thousands of people started using these boxes to treat conditions that the medicine of the time considered lost causes. Reports of tumor remissions, relief from chronic fatigue, and systematic cellular rejuvenation began to flood Organon. Reich explained that the accumulator did not cure the disease directly, but rather recharged the patient's immune system with pure orgone, allowing the body itself to do the work. He saw disease as a state of low energy charge. For him, cancer was the physical manifestation of a life that had stopped pulsating. Reich's success began to generate a dangerous noise. People weren't just getting healthy, they were becoming independent. And this is where the financial factor that always precedes silencing comes in. If a box made of wood and metal, which you can build yourself in your backyard, can revitalize your health without the need for expensive chemical interventions, you cease to be a profitable consumer for the medical industrial complex. The FBI had already kept a file on Reich since his arrival in the US, initially suspecting him of his political inclinations. But when they saw he was creating a free energy technology that challenged both physics and medicine, the focus shifted. He went from being watched as a possible spy to being monitored as a technological insurgent. But Reich still had a trick up his sleeve, something that would take the confrontation with the government to a global scale. He realized that if he could concentrate energy in a box, he could also project it into space. He was about to create the Cloudbuster, the machine that would prove orgone governed not only the human body, but the fate of the planet itself through the weather. It was in 1952 that Wilhelm Reich elevated his research to a level that the United States government considered intolerable. He realized that if orgone was the force that maintained the cohesion of the atmosphere, then it could be manipulated to alter the weather. Reich built a device that looked like something out of a science fiction movie of the time, the Cloudbuster. The machine consisted of a series of hollow metal tubes mounted on a rotating base and connected to thick cables that were submerged in running water, such as a river or a deep well. There was no electricity, there were no motors, there was no fuel. The principle was purely biophysical. Water, being a powerful attractor of orgone, created an energy gradient that allowed the tubes to suck the orgone charge from certain areas of the sky. Reich explained that clouds form when orgone energy is highly concentrated. By pointing the tubes at a cloud, he could drain its energy, causing it to dissipate in minutes. Conversely, by pointing it at dry areas, he could attract energy from other regions, forcing condensation and rainfall. The definitive test occurred in July 1953. The state of Maine was facing a historic drought that threatened to destroy the entire blueberry harvest of the region. Two local farmers, desperate, sought out Reich and offered to pay for the service if he could bring rain. On the morning of July 6th, Reich set up the Cloudbuster. The sky was clear, dry, and with no forecast of change. He operated the device for a few hours, directing the tubes to different quadrants of the horizon. By late afternoon, dense clouds began to form out of nowhere. At night, a torrential rain fell upon the dry plantations, saving the local economy. The event was so impactful that the local newspaper, the Bangor Daily News, published the news with the headline, "Dr. Reich brings rain to the region." But what was a blessing for the farmers was a nightmare for the Department of Defense. If a man, acting independently, could control the rain cycle with metal tubes and water, official meteorology became obsolete, and the strategic control of the weather, something the government was already studying secretly, was in the hands of an uncontrollable civilian. Reich began to document something even stranger. He claimed the atmosphere was being poisoned by a stagnant and toxic form of energy he called DOR, deadly orgone radiation. For him, industrial pollution and early nuclear tests were creating holes of dead energy in the sky, and the cloudbuster was the only tool capable of cleaning the atmosphere. In his diaries, Reich described nocturnal operations where he used the cloudbuster to neutralize what he believed were sources of this deadly radiation. He claimed the sky was an invisible battlefield between life and stagnation. For the federal agents watching him, these claims were the perfect pretext to change the narrative. From brilliant but eccentric scientist, Reich began to be officially treated as a dangerous madman. The system realized it could not compete with the effectiveness of the cloudbuster, so it decided the only way out was to dismantle the man behind the machine. The circle was closing, and the next storm Reich would face would not come from the clouds, but from the courts of Washington. While Wilhelm Reich operated his cloudbuster in the fields of Maine, something dark began to manifest in his radars and observations. He noticed that the sky did not always respond in the same way. He identified dark patches, areas of an oppressive stillness where birds stopped singing and tree leaves seemed to wither for no apparent reason. He called this DOR, or deadly orgone radiation. For Reich, DOR was the opposite of life. It was orgone energy that had stopped pulsating, becoming stagnant and toxic. He believed this dead energy was caused primarily by the radioactivity of nuclear tests and the industrial emissions that were beginning to suffocate the planet. Reich initiated what he called Operation Space Gun, using his devices to try and dissipate these pockets of negative energy. He was convinced he was in a literal war for the survival of the biosphere. However, to the outside observer and the intelligence agencies, these descriptions seemed like the delusions of a man who had lost contact with reality. It was the perfect hook the system needed. If they couldn't refute the rain that fell in Maine, they could attack the sanity of the man who provoked it. The executing arm of this mission was not the Army, but the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, the agency that regulates food and medicine in the United States. For more than a decade, the FDA accumulated an immense dossier on Reich, spending astronomical sums of public money to prove that the orgone accumulator was a fraud. They sent undercover agents to buy the boxes, infiltrated his lectures, and pressured his collaborators to betray him. The problem for the FDA was irritating. They could not prove the device was useless because users continued to report consistent improvements in their health. The strategy then shifted. In 1954, instead of a scientific debate, the FDA obtained a court injunction, a direct order that forbade Reich from transporting accumulators or any literature that mentioned the word orgone across state lines. It was a master legal maneuver. They transformed a question of physics into a question of logistics and legal compliance. If Reich sent a single book to a colleague in another state, he would not be judged for his ideas. But for civil disobedience and contempt of court, Reich, in his almost naive integrity, refused to appear in court. He sent a letter to the judge that today is considered a landmark of intellectual resistance. He wrote, "My responsibility toward the preservation of knowledge about life forbids me from submitting my research to the judgment of courts that do not possess the scientific competence to evaluate them." For Reich, science could not be governed by lawyers. For the government, this was the confession they needed to label him an outlaw. The siege was set. On one side, the scientist trying to clean the sky. On the other, a bureaucratic machine ready to shred his reputation, confiscate his laboratory, and finally, erase his name from the memory of humanity. What happened next was an event unparalleled in the legal history of the United States. When Wilhelm Reich refused to appear in court, he wasn't just being stubborn. He was protecting the autonomy of science. But the system does not take no for an answer. In May 1954, the court issued a sentence that seemed plucked from the darkest pages of history: total destruction. The judge ordered that all orgone accumulators be destroyed with axes and, most shockingly, that all literature produced by Reich mentioning the word orgone be incinerated. Imagine the weight of that order. We are talking about a country that prides itself on the First Amendment, on freedom of speech and the press. Yet there were government agents entering Reich's property at Organon, smashing expensive equipment with heavy tools. But the worst was yet to come. On a grey afternoon, FDA trucks parked in front of the laboratory and loaded box after box of knowledge. They weren't just books for sale. They were laboratory diaries, clinical observations spanning decades, and unpublished manuscripts that had never seen the light of day. These agents took this material to a public incinerator in downtown New York. Under the watchful eye of federal officials, the flames consumed what Reich considered the legacy of humanity. Why did the government go to such trouble to burn paper? The answer is that the knowledge contained in those records was replicable. If someone followed Reich's instructions on how to build a cloudbuster or how to tune into the energy of the ether, centralized control over energy and health would collapse. The fire wasn't meant to destroy paper. It was meant to erase the possibility of a different future. While his works turned to ash, Reich watched the collapse of everything he had built. His friends and collaborators were subpoenaed and threatened. The press, fed by distorted information from the FDA, began a character assassination campaign, calling him the cult of sex and the magic box. They took the complex theory of bioenergy and reduced it to sensationalist headlines to ensure the general public felt ashamed to support the scientist. But even in the midst of destruction, Reich did not back down. He continued to write secretly, trying to record what remained in his memory. He knew he was living through a modern inquisition, where the bonfires were no longer in public squares, but in hidden industrial incinerators. He realized the system didn't just want to silence him, it wanted to erase the fact that he ever had a voice. The trial for contempt of court was merely the final formality to remove the man from the scene and lock him behind bars, where the blue light of Orgone would be replaced by the gray of federal prison walls. To destroy a man like Wilhelm Reich, the government knew that burning his books wasn't enough. They had to burn his reputation, and the weapon chosen for this was moral sensationalism. But why, after all, did the press and the FDA label the work of a serious scientist as a sex cult? The answer lies in the purposely distorted way the system interpreted the basis of his theory: orgastic potency. Reich, coming from the school of Freud, claimed that mental and physical health depended on the body's ability to release accumulated energy. For him, the orgasm was not just an act of pleasure, but a biological mechanism for discharging organ energy. He believed that when this discharge was blocked by muscular armoring, the tensions we accumulate through traumas and repressions, energy stagnated, generating diseases such as cancer and deep neuroses. Reich used the term orgastic to describe the natural pulsation of life, the same pulse he saw in beyonds and in the clouds. The FDA took these complex scientific concepts and translated them for the public of that time in a malicious way. They spread rumors that orgone accumulators were, in fact, sex boxes, where people gathered for immoral practices. The term orgone, which Reich created to unite organism and organization, was presented as a dirty word, suggesting that his science was merely an excuse for debauchery. In the conservative and puritanical America of the 1950s, this was a social death sentence. If you were a family man or an academic, you did not want your name associated with a man called the prophet of sex. The system was so efficient that it transformed the quest for cellular health into a tabloid scandal. They ignored Einstein's temperature measurements and the blueberry fields saved by the rain in Maine, focusing only on ridiculing the idea that sexual energy and atmospheric energy could be the same thing. By labeling Reich as the leader of a cult, they stripped him of his status as a scientist and placed him in the category of a dangerous charlatan. This, a weapon of mass distraction tactic, served to ensure the public didn't ask the question that really mattered. If the boxes were useless and the man was just a sex-obsessed madman, why did the government spend millions of dollars and send federal agents to incinerate every single page of his studies? The sex cult label was the perfect smokescreen to hide a free energy technology that threatened the foundations of centralized control. While the crowd pointed fingers at Reich's supposed immorality, the government silently confiscated the keys to a science that could have liberated humanity from energy and pharmaceutical dependence. On March 12, 1957, Wilhelm Reich walked through the gates of the Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary in Pennsylvania. The image was devastating. The man who was once Freud's right-hand man, the scientist who dared to challenge Einstein and who controlled the skies of Maine, was now merely inmate number 23,743. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison, not for a crime against a person, but for contempt of court, the legal euphemism used to punish those who refused to surrender their soul to the system. Even behind bars, Reich's mind did not stop. Reports from other prisoners and guards suggest that he maintained a dignified, almost regal posture, despite the degrading environment. He spent hours writing on small scraps of paper, trying to reconstruct the equations that the government had turned into ashes in the incinerators of New York. But the system had a final plan to ensure that the Reich problem was resolved once and for all. On the morning of November 3rd, 1957, just 2 days before his parole hearing, the day he would finally leave to tell the world what he had gone through, Wilhelm Reich was found dead in his cell. The official diagnosis? Sudden heart failure. A convenient and swift conclusion for a 60-year-old man who, despite the stress, had no history of serious heart disease that would justify such a precise collapse. Reich's death is surrounded by anomalies that time has not been able to erase. Why are the prison medical records from that week so vague? Why did his personal belongings and the manuscripts he produced in his cell mysteriously disappear before they were delivered to his family? And the most disturbing detail, some researchers who investigated the case years later mentioned the presence of strange marks on his body, similar to small burns or punctures, which were never properly explained in the official autopsy. Reich's death was the coup de grace to his work. Without the master to operate the devices, without the original books to guide students, and with his name tarnished by labels of charlatanism, orgone science was buried along with him in a simple grave. The United States government achieved what seemed impossible. They killed the man, burned his library, and silenced his voice. But while Reich's body grew cold in that prison cell, the world outside was entering the space age and the climate arms race. They had eliminated the inventor, but the patents and concepts he discovered did not disappear. They simply changed hands, migrating from the open laboratory of Organon to the closed bunkers of secret defense projects. The story you have just witnessed is the perfect example that reality has doors that the system tries to keep locked under 7 keys. But you are here at the unseen key, and our purpose is precisely to deliver to you the invisible key capable of opening these cracks in the official narrative. If you feel that this knowledge has resonated with your search for truth, do not let this door close. Subscribe now if you are not yet part of our intellectual resistance. Leave your like to strengthen this frequency and, most importantly, comment below. How did you feel knowing that scientific books were burned in the middle of the modern era? And what is the next key you want us to turn? Who is the next silenced genius who deserves to have their story told here? Your interaction is what keeps this channel alive. Today, decades after the FDA's bonfires, the shadow of Wilhelm Reich is larger than ever. If you look at the HAARP antenna complexes in Alaska or at the modern cloud seeding systems used by governments around the world, you will see the DNA of Reich's research. What he called manipulation of atmospheric orgone, modern science has renamed with technical terms like ionospheric heating or geoengineering. They changed the names, but the fundamental physics of altering the electrical charge of the atmosphere to dictate the weather remains the same as what Reich proved in Maine in 1953. The story of Wilhelm Reich is not just a tale of persecution. It is a warning about the cost of truth. He showed us that we live in an ocean of invisible, infinite and free energy, and that the system is willing to burn books and lock geniuses in cells to prevent you from learning how to swim in that ocean. Organ energy, that bluish light he saw pulsating in bions, is still out there. It is in the air you breathe, in the glow of the sun, and in the vitality that the system tries to drain from you every day through programmed scarcity. Reich died as a prisoner, but his life left an open code for anyone who has the courage to look. His experiments with the cloudbuster and the accumulator proved that humanity does not need to be a slave to finite resources. His silencing was the definitive proof that his discoveries were real. After all, no one spends that much effort to destroy a lie. The system only mobilizes the army and the justice system against that which can topple it. As we close this investigation, look at the sky. Those clouds that form or dissipate in strange ways. The antennas that pulse invisible frequencies over our heads. And the constant struggle for integral health are the battlefields where Reich's war is still being waged. He was the man who dared to touch the invisible and speak with the clouds. They burned the paper, but they could not burn the ether. The question that remains for you now is not whether Reich was right, but rather, what else is hidden under the ashes of what the government has forbidden us to read? The story of Wilhelm Reich is proof that the greatest prison is not made of metal bars, but of the ignorance imposed upon us regarding our own power and the energy that surrounds us. The bonfire of 1956 still burns, but today, through information that can no longer be burned, the blue light of orgone is beginning to shine again.